Good evening.
It's been very wet the last few days. And, I don't know if I like it. It's good to see you guys again. I know it's been a minute because it got pretty wet, especially on the other side during Sunday. Tonight is going to be a continuation of the series we were doing on Providence. So to review from last week, we went over Ruth. We looked at a few key parts of the story of Ruth. We went very in-depth, very fast. And next individual we'll look at today will be Joseph, and I'll try to make sure it's not as rapid fire. I got pretty excited about the story of Ruth, just like I did for this one too, but hopefully it's more condensed. So I'll go ahead and just to help us start off, we'll be starting in chapter 37 of Genesis. We're going to do a quick overview of 37 all the way through till the last chapter, looking at tidbits here and there. Just a quick overview. We're not going to go in depth. Just highlighting key parts of his story and how it relates to God's providence. So looking back on Ruth, we'll just do a quick recap. Who remembers, what were some key aspects to the story of Ruth that stuck out? So Ruth was from what nationality? Does anybody remember?
Moabite.
Okay. How did her nationality stick out in this story?
Ruth, she was Moabite. She was different, right? Because she went with her mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, who was a Jew.
Okay.
And so they have different cultures, different backgrounds, different gods. And so she's going into a foreign country. But God, you expressed how God was still with her, even though she was an outcast. God still used her in His plans to do good.
Thank you. So as Brother Seth brought up, Ruth didn't follow the norm. And we can see that her decisions and her character that she showed in her life and in her story, we can see how much of an impact it had on the people of Israel. We can see how God works through Ruth, and how she's even brought up as a key part of the genealogy in the first chapter of Matthew. So also looking into that as well, what were some key aspects of her story and decisions and life that kind of showed that providence or care from God? How did those her life events line up in a way to God's plan?
Well, she went gleaning in the right field.
Yeah. She's at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Almost perfectly on the money, according to the story. Anything else?
Well, she trusted her mother-in-law, Naomi's God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was an idol worshiper or Moabite, so that would be once she saw, I guess, Ruth's Naomi's God, then
The evangelistic nature. Okay. Another quick highlight as well. Looking back on the story of Boaz, we can see how God utilized the law at the time to make sure that everything was done not just according to His plan, but it was done in the right way. So that also further emphasizes that plan and pattern of making sure that we adhere to the authorities as well on earth. And how we do that as a Christian, as people of God, as it was back then. So now, we're going to look at a few key different parts of Joseph's life. We're going to look at his time in the pit. We'll see early on what his relationship was with the family, with his brothers. And then we'll look at other aspects too in his time in Egypt. So starting off, wanting to look in chapter 37 of Genesis. So the early part of 37 is when we start seeing the story of Joseph. first thing that it starts off with in the very beginning is his relationship with his family. So we'll go ahead and start there. So looking at verse 2 all the way to verse 4. If somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding a flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So how far?
It was just 4.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So here, just in these 2 verses, or sorry, 3 verses. That's where I can count. What are some key things that already come to mind about Joseph early on?
We can already see position that he has.
Mm-hmm.
You can see a glimpse of his hardship that's going to come about in his life.
Okay.
The way how he's being treated right then and there. He's gifted a coat of many colors. The scriptures say that his father expresses more love towards him than the other children. And so you can see how that's going to have a repercussion.
Okay. And just as a side thought, not really the main point, how does this relate to his father as well? So if we look at the story of Jacob and Esau, what kind of patterns do you see? For those that remember the story.
Go ahead.
It's like his father was the same way.
Yep.
He loved one son more than the other.
So you can see this generational pattern and what happens. Another key aspect too is going to be seeing how not only is he getting treated differently, you can see that he's identified it too. So later on, especially when we look at the last couple chapters, or the last chapter in Genesis, that's going to be a key highlight that I wanted to bring up as well. Even though he knows early on that he's being treated differently, I wanted to pay attention to his character throughout the coming chapters. So going further in the chapter, then you can see later on where it mentions Joseph's dream, so the prophetic dream of regarding what's going to happen to him. And then we start getting into the plot against Joseph. So a quick recap of the story without reading too far in is we can see later on in chapter 37 that his brothers are starting to hold that grudge. We can see that the plot thickens enough and the anger builds up enough that they do the unthinkable that you would do to your family. So continuing on that, if we look starting in verse 18, somebody could read from 18 until, sorry, I didn't write it down. I don't know the first verse. Where did we go? From 18 until 24. So chapter 37, 18 and 24.
Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it.
Thank you. So here we get to see a quick overview of exactly how far they went. So before we even get to the point of him being sold into slavery, we can see he's already being treated in such a poor manner. A couple of things that stick out specifically is not only is he thrown into the pit, but they even tore up his key prized possessions. And further on, we can see that it escalates. From there, what happens when, in the future, when he gets sold into slavery? What's another key aspect to how Joseph is treated and how he's portrayed to his father? Anybody remember? Okay.
I mean, yes. I mean, we can continue not too many verses later on. And they express the brothers come together with the tunic. They pour blood. They got blood on it, right? They shown this tunic to their father, saying, "Your son has died," and you can see that Jacob is full of sorrow, right? And the way how he treats the situation is very unpleasant. It is the grieving that is shown. Then, like you said, we're gonna skip ahead. We're not gonna spend too much time on it. But he gets sold into Egypt, right? Not too many verses later, they find Ishmaelites, it says, and so he sold it into slavery. First to the Ishmaelites, and then they're going to Egypt, and they're going to sell him in Egypt, and he gets, I believe it's Potiphar. No.
Potiphar.
Yeah.
There's Potiphar.
Oh, I thought you said okay. Yeah.
So Potiphar eventually gets Joseph.
Thank you. That's a pretty quick overview. A key aspect before we move into his time in Egypt, reflecting on just what you can read throughout this chapter, as you pointed out, it's a very, very unkind treatment. It's a very awful story when you try to put yourself in his shoes. So going further into that, what I wanted to focus on tonight is later on, as we start to look at a couple key components, is how such a story is turned into a saving grace for Israel. So, as a very small example from what happened in the last few days, it's almost like I'll compare it to my dog lately. We can see when weather comes in, when the rain comes in the long term, it's good. It's good for the environment. It's good for the plants. It's good for our overall well-being. It's a water source. It's our livelihood. But sometimes the way life events go and the way the weather goes, we might not like when it shows up. We may not enjoy it in the moment. It might cause destruction. But we know that the end result is always normally good. We pray and give thanks for the blessing, for the rain. My dog doesn't like to walk in it. She doesn't like getting wet. She hates getting her feet wet, but she loves laying in the grass and things like that. And you need that. You need the weather. And here in this aspect, you can see there's a lot of pain, a lot of misery that comes to Joseph. But we can see that later on, he will realize that it was meant for good. Looking in chapter 50, verse 20, I'll just look at it briefly. That's going to be kind of the key mindset for tonight. So chapter 50 is when his father dies, and then the record of Joseph dying at the end. But when his father dies, his brothers are afraid of how he's been treated. We can see starting in verse 16, they send a message to Joseph saying, "Your father charged before he died, saying, 'Thus you say to Joseph, please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. It says, but Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? In the verse 20 specifically, As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result. So that's a key point I wanted to focus on, especially tonight, as we look at a few different things. We can see that even though he was treated so poorly all the way his time through Egypt, and even in Egypt, and even though he was treated on that pedestal with his father, the mindset that he ends up with. And so instead of focusing on those grudges, and specifically what was inflicted upon him, he's identified how God works through him. So a couple things we'll look at tonight is we'll look at his time in the prison, and a couple of different roles with his dreams. So the first thing we'll look at tonight is his time in the prison. So looking in chapter 39, starting in 17 through 20. If somebody doesn't mind reading that.
17 through 20. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison.
Thank you. So here we can see the continuing pattern of deceit and human nature. So throughout this story, it's going to be a back and forth once you start reading the later chapters of the difference between human choices, their responsibility, and the consequences of those choices, but seeing how God still finds a way. So the biggest back and forth dichotomy between the two is, even though we may choose to sin, and we have that free will as choices to either follow God or be of this world, God still finds a way for his plan. So looking at the God side in this story, let's look at chapter 45, verses 7 and 8, if somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
And God sent me before you to preserve a prosperity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt.
Thank you. So what we previously read, we saw exactly what happened to put him in that prison. Going into further detail, which I encourage for self-study, we can see his time in the prison and his dreams. That was his opportunity to reach that point later on. And Joseph identifies that. He identifies his ability to, I just realized I was further from right. He identifies just how God works through his time in the prison and his time in Egypt in slavery to reach that point. We can see that his wrongful imprisonment wasn't really a detour, but it was by design. It was a need to be in the right place at the right time for God. It positioned him to meet the officials, leading ultimately to that exalted position that he ended up in next to Pharaoh. even for the looking back on the pit as well, we can see that him being sold into slavery, that was that key starting point of it all. Specifically, reading further on for the dreams for his time in the prison, we can see early on that his dreams were already prophetic. There's already a pattern going on. And the dreams with Pharaoh, I just wanted to look at a couple aspects of the plenty and the famine. So we'll look in chapter 41 real quick. That's going to be the first 7 verses of chapter 41, if somebody doesn't mind reading that.
Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine-looking and fat, and they fed on the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed the second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told him his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh.
Thank you. So the beginning of this chapter, we can see his dream bringing about the prophecy of the famine for the 7 years. 7 years of plenty and then the 7 years of famine. Looking later in the chapter, looking through 37 all the way to 41, we can see how that catapults him into that authority figure as things start to come to be. And then further on, a key verse I wanted to look at tonight is going to be in verse 32, if somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
Sorry, what chapter again?
Oh, sorry. 41, verse 32.
Verse 32, okay. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass.
Thank you. My version reads it a little bit different as well, so I'll read it as well. Actually, kind of like a combination of both. It says, now for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. So what's a key factor on this verse that sticks out to you? Not only was it prophesied, but what else?
Before I answer that, I wanted to bring up verse 39 first to see more of Joseph in his, chapter 39, about Joseph in his position. I wanted to just bring that up. In verse 2 it says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master in Egypt, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, he put under his authority. So, and I saw a cross-reference here with the story of Ruth. It reminded me of Ruth, how she said, I will go with you, Naomi, your God will be my God. And she went into a foreign land, right? Yeah. And so Joseph knew the God that his father Jacob served, and his position is going to a different land where they worship different gods. Yeah. And so, even though he was in that foreign place, he still held on to the one true God. And so God was always with him, and so he said, God, I'm so going to, my life is just for you. I'm going to do my best to continue to serve you. And God was with him, and things began to prosper. And so Potiphar saw this and saw that things were coming to fruition. And so he gave him authority. And that's pretty, that's a hefty load to put on someone, right? Especially if he's not an Egyptian, he's a foreigner. But yet Potiphar sees that this God that he serves is with him. And things are coming to fruition. And then he's thrown into prison now, he's falsely accused. People are having these dreams, he's able to interpret them. And then later on, they get him out because Pharaoh's having these dreams. Right? So now we're at Pharaoh. And so he's interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, and it is still establishing that I am not interpreting this of my own accord. God is helping me with this. So he's giving God the glory. And he's showing Pharaoh, who is king, that there's someone greater than him. And so this Pharaoh is acknowledging that there is a higher power. And this thing that is going to come to pass, we just read in verse 32 that, what was it? I forgot the saying. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice. Okay, so it's repeated twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So it's going to come. You can't stop it. It belongs to God. It's going to happen. So they're acknowledging a higher power, and so they need to prepare. And so they're putting everything into someone else's hands to help them get through this time of hardship and struggle.
Thank you. You kind of skipped ahead to the part I was excited about. That's fine. We can do it earlier. You pretty much nailed it on the head, especially the Ruth section. That's what I was going to get to. That's why I had cheese. Sugar did. And then actually, to follow up on it, just in case I didn't clarify it enough, it was a dream from Pharaoh. I wasn't saying it was Joseph's dream. He interpreted that dream. The dream Joseph had before was his child. Just in case I did define or say that it was Joseph's dream for the game. So following up on that, you said quite a bit, so I can kind of skim through a little bit now. So a key aspect of this story, overall, is you can see, especially in chapter 41, if you wanted to look in your own study, pretty much 50 through 57, we can see that there's pretty much a worldwide famine going on at this time throughout that region. And part of the push for Joseph going into Egypt was the ability to bring Israel to Egypt, to bring them to that land of plenty, that land of prosperity, the fertility, and Egypt ramping for the incoming famine. So that region being hospitable and able to provide for Israel, for Israel's family, and for his people. And that's when it follows up later on in the chapter of it was a matter that was fixed or brought about by God. We can see further on, if you want to read on your own time, that Goshen was especially fertile. In chapter 46, the beginning portions of that's where that's mentioned. You can see further on that it was yet another means to sustain that family line that eventually Jesus would come through, just like with Ruth. There's a couple other key aspects to it too that I wanted to highlight, and so we'll go into that here a little bit. But that key overall summary is, we can see not only was Joseph treated poorly by his family, he was thrown in a pit, he was treated as dead by his brothers, sold into slavery, the whole 9 yards of everything we don't want. And yet, all of that comes to an end, to a betterment fixed by God. So the last couple of things I want to look at are going to be a similar reflection, and that's kind of the most exciting part I want to get into, is the key aspects of Joseph's life and how it actually also humanizes and relates to the efforts by Christ. And so if we look over a couple key aspects of it, looking back in chapter 37, verse 3, somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors.
Thank you. So we can see how it was, how he was treated because of that. Whether it was good or bad, there's a couple different implications to it that you could go down, good and bad. But a key aspect that I kind of wanted to look at as well is how that relates to Matthew chapter 3. So if we look at Matthew 3, verse 17, somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
And suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased."
So you can see that same correlation or pattern in Joseph's story of Jesus was the begotten and beloved Son. Even other key aspects too, where how Joseph was treated because of it. Christ was God the Son, and yet how is he perceived and treated by his king, by his people? Was it good? It wasn't. And so that's just a key aspect that I thought was interesting, just for study and thought. Another aspect was specifically that rejection. So looking in verse 4 back in Genesis, we can see how he was rejected already early on by his brothers. If we look in John chapter 1, verse 11, Jesus came to his own, and his own received him not. We can see again that pattern of how Israel, even though they were God's people, how they treated those that were in God's plan. Even his betrayal. We didn't really read into it specifically, so we'll look at it real quick. Genesis 37, verse 28. How many pieces, or how much was Joseph sold for?
20 shekels.
Correct, 20. And we can see how much was Jesus betrayed for in Matthew 26, verse 15.
30.
Correct. Both of them were betrayed for money. We can see that, again, the human responsibility, the human interaction, how we sometimes choose to treat people when we forget God. And yet, if we follow along in Jesus' story, we can see that the end result of Christ's story was a fulfillment for salvation. Even the plotting, there's a couple things that align us for that as well. There were conspiracies against their lives by those who were closest to them. For Jesus, it was Judas. For Joseph, it was his brothers. We can see how they were humiliated and suffered. If we look in Genesis 39, verses 7 through 12, you can see Joseph resisted temptation from Potiphar. For Jesus, looking in Matthew chapter 4, he resisted Satan. Other aspects too, he was both of them falsely accused and imprisoned and or even crucified for Jesus. And then I'll list those as well. So Genesis 39, specifically 15 through 20, and then Matthew, if you want to read from that gospel, it's 26, starting in 59. We can see that even how they were incriminated. A key part of the crucifixion that sometimes is brought up in study is how he wasn't crucified alone, but he was crucified with fellow criminals. Well, with criminals, him not being a criminal. That was that word. And so him being imprisoned and also incriminated with other individuals. Joseph was jailed with two criminals. One was saved and one was lost. In Genesis chapter 40. Both of them, they were stripped of their robes. You can see Joseph, his robe of many colors, he lost early on. And the Roman soldiers, they stripped Jesus and gambled his garments in Matthew 27. And further on, we can see even their recognition aspect. They were roughly around the same age when they fulfilled the climax of their roles, Jesus to his ultimate death. And even how they were exalted through God's plan. There's a lot of similar patterns. There's so many things that were interesting when I looked into it. It's just a couple of things I wanted to share today. And again, the last bit I'll end off with tonight is looking back at chapter 50 of Genesis. So looking at 50 verse 20, if somebody wouldn't mind reading that again. And then if you can go ahead and read through to 21 actually, 20 and 21.
But as for me, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid, I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them.
Thank you. So there's a couple of key aspects I want to end off with tonight, and I wanted to hopefully get a couple of your thoughts as well. Again, reiterating, God meant it for good in order to bring out this present result. So there's plenty of times that we can especially think in our own lives where we didn't make the best choices. Where life seemed to go awry. But yet any of those choices, eventually they brought you here. Whether good or bad. There's plenty of key aspects in life in my childhood where I realized I screwed up real bad. I was not always a good kid. Growing up in the church, there's even points in times where I almost tried to escape kind of that life. I was upset about so many things and had so many wrong priorities, and eventually it still brought me back, especially in high school. I didn't make the best choices, especially around middle school age. Was with the wrong crowd, had the wrong thoughts, had the wrong reactions to people. Made some pretty rough choices, not gonna lie. And yet ultimately I still ended up back here. Even when it came to specifically being a part of this body, I haven't been here for super long, but I appreciate being here a lot more than I probably let off, and that you probably let off. A lot of rough choices brought me here. And I'll probably get emotional if I talk about it too much, but I'm excited with how much I healed by coming here. So I just wanted to leave it open for the next couple minutes, see if there's any thoughts or highlights from just a quick blurb of it.
Just a thought that, Joseph, he tried to, God gave him the dreams, the first dreams about his brothers and his family bowing down before him. Okay, and just by mentioning them, he kind of rubbed them the wrong way, and just by trying to live the right life, trying to live, that way, we're going to, in our lives, we may rub people the wrong way too, just by trying to live the right life. And, even Potiphar in his household, his wife, she saw him, she was rejected by him, and so she had a bad reaction to him, and she concocted the story, lied about him, and that's how he got into prison. And still through that, he could have spoken up, but he just, he continued to live the life the best that he could and to follow God. even in prison, he doesn't take credit for being able to interpret the dreams of the other two. He says God's the one who can interpret dreams. And it gets to the point where people will recognize that this is a person who believes in God, or that God's with him. I mean, it even says when he was talking about interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, they recognized after he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, Pharaoh recognized that God was with them. I think it was in chapter. Let's see, in chapter 41, the advice that he gave, and Pharaoh said that the servants, can we find such as one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So even the Pharaoh of Egypt, this guy who's in a culture that worships so many different kinds of gods, recognizes that there's something different about this guy. He has the Spirit of God Almighty in him, and he's ready to give control of Egypt over to him, so that he can that he can do that.
And to add on to that, Pharaoh was often treated as the god on earth for Egyptians too. So it's interesting seeing how he reflects on that. Is there anything else? I'm sure you have a couple words.
One more thing, whenever I read the story of Joseph, I'm also reminded of the story of Daniel, and this just another really brilliant example of just this example of how God can use things and can use bad situations to bring about His will and His glory and something good for everyone. So it's just amazing how this concept is that you're talking about it. It seems so awkward.
Thank you. And I didn't do the story any justice. I just highlighted a couple of key things that stuck out in my study. So again, I encourage, especially to read the chapters. It's a few. I'm trying to do math again. 13. 13 chapters. But there's so much that you could glean off of it that I couldn't do it justice. Is there anything else? Okay. So to end off for invitation tonight, highlighting again how God can work through us, even in our work life. It's a time set aside to offer that invitation in self-reflection, so we can realize that there's plenty of moments where life can bring us down, where we fall short. But we can see time and time again throughout the Bible how God can still bring us back to Him. Even if it's not miraculous, we can see He still provides. He always has a plan when it comes to His creation. For those who have fallen short, or for those who have never even been a member, we always have a time. Every time we study, every time we come together, it's a time to add another member. It's a time to bring each other back. So going through that, whether it's for further study with one of us, or if it's asking for prayers, for care, for support, that's what this body is for. That's what it means to be a member of the church. So if anybody has any needs, and they'd like to bring them now, at this time as we stand.